Several law enforcement officers from Mississippi are accused of helping flood Memphis's streets with dangerous drugs. That's part of the 27-page federal indictment against 20 people, including 2 Mississippi sheriff's deputies, highway patrol, and local police.
Let this be a lesson for those sworn to serve the public that if you're a good law enforcement officer, the FBI will always stand with you. But for those corrupt individuals who abuse their office, we will come for you.
Happening, the FBI announcing indictments against 20 people, including 14 current and former Mississippi and Tennessee police officers in a drug-related bribery probe. So prosecutors accuse the officers of providing escort services to drug traffickers in exchange for bribes.
The Rio Grande Valley is still dark. Along a quiet stretch of farm-to-market road outside a small Texas border city, nothing has moved in over an hour. No headlights, no civilian traffic. Just the low hum of diesel engines idling at a standstill and the distant orange glow of a refinery stack burning 3 miles to the east. 2 marked patrol units, lights off, are parked nose to tail at a gravel turnout beside a drainage channel. The officers inside are in full uniform, badges on, department-issued weapons holstered, radios on. They are not there to protect anyone. They are waiting for a truck. By sunrise, 18 people are in federal custody. 3 Texas Department of Public Safety troopers, a Webb County Sheriff's deputy with 11 years of service, 4 officers from 3 separate municipal police departments spread along the border corridor, a licensed county constable, 2 bail bondsmen the FBI would later describe in court filings as the logistical backbone of the entire operation, and 7 additional individuals connected to the distribution network those officers had been actively protecting for nearly 2 full years. Would you trust any of them with a badge and a gun? Here is what they were doing with theirs. They were escorting what they believed were multi-kilogram fentanyl and methamphetamine shipments along federal highway corridors between the Texas-Mexico border and distribution hubs in San Antonio and Houston, in uniform, in marked units, with their radios tuned to the right frequencies to intercept any interdiction call before it reached the active route. And some of them were doing it for as little as $800 a run. Think about what that number means. A sworn law enforcement officer, badged by the state of Texas, was clearing a lane on a public federal highway for what he genuinely believed was a mass quantity narcotic shipment headed into the interior of his state for less than the cost of a used television set. The communities these officers patrolled did not get to stay abstract in this story. There is a family in a colonia outside Laredo, one of the unincorporated border settlements where unpaved caliche roads run alongside open drainage ditches and property lines blur into federal easements. Their youngest son came home from a 6-month county jail stint in the summer of 2024 with every intention of staying clean. He had a job lined up at a supply warehouse. He lasted 9 weeks. His mother does not know the names of the officers who helped clear the corridor that brought the product reaching her neighborhood. She may never know. She knows only that the people she was supposed to call when something went wrong were not fighting the crisis. They were charging admission to it. The South Texas border corridor runs from Laredo east toward McAllen and west toward Eagle Pass, branching into the interior through a web of interstate highways and state farm roads that have carried commercial traffic since before the region had a highway patrol. This area processes one of the highest volumes of cross-border commercial trucking in the Western Hemisphere. It is also among the most economically constrained corridors in the United States. Median household incomes in Webb County fall well below the state average. Municipal law enforcement agencies along the corridor operate on budgets that frequently cannot cover basic equipment replacement. The officers they recruit are, in many cases, people who grew up in the same communities they now police. They are not strangers to the pressures of the corridor. They are products of it. In smaller municipalities along the border, the police department is often one of the largest employers in town. The patrol officer who runs your tags at a traffic stop is also, in many cases, the person who coached a youth league team on Saturday mornings. The deputy who processes the overnight arrest log may have graduated from the same high school as your children. Institutional trust here is not abstract. It is personal. And when that trust is weaponized from the inside, the damage is not institutional alone. It is intimate. According to a federal indictment unsealed in the Southern District of Texas, that intimacy had been quietly converted into an operational asset by a CJNG-affiliated distribution cell working out of Nuevo Laredo. The senior figure in this fictional reconstruction, referred to in court documents as Officer Ronaldo Vega, had served with the Texas DPS for 14 years. His performance record was clean. A commendation for a major narcotics seizure was filed in 2021. That commendation was still mounted in a frame on his office wall when federal agents walked through the door. He was, by every outward institutional metric, the job, which made him, by every investigative standard, the most dangerous kind of compromised officer there is, the kind no one is looking for. Because the surface reads exactly right. The investigation that eventually brought Vega and 17 others into federal custody did not begin with an internal affairs complaint. It did not begin with a wiretap, a financial audit, or a tip from within any of the agencies involved. It began with a phone call from a funeral home director in Nuevo Laredo, Mexico. The director operated a small family business on a commercial street 2 blocks from a major border crossing. 3 years earlier, his business had been used as a document processing front by intermediaries connected to the same CJNG cell. He had not been charged. He had kept his distance. He had tried to move on. But in the fall of 2023, the same intermediaries returned. This time, they were not asking for document services. They needed introductions. They needed reliable law enforcement contacts on the Texas side of the line. 2 recent corridor shipments had been lost, not to random interdiction, but to what the cell's own internal assessment concluded was a targeted intelligence leak. They needed someone new, someone with current institutional access and no prior connection to their network. The funeral director had heard enough. He located an FBI field agent he had briefly spoken with at a community engagement meeting in Laredo nearly 2 years earlier. He placed a call. He gave the agent 2 names, 1 phone number, and a rough description of what was being planned. The FBI opened a preliminary inquiry within 72 hours. Within 3 weeks, it had been elevated to a full field investigation, classified and compartmentalized, away from every Texas state and local law enforcement partner. What analysts found when they began cross-referencing patrol assignment logs against known corridor shipment windows was methodical and deeply unsettling. Specific patrol routes had been quietly modified on certain calendar dates. Checkpoint staffing had decreased on evenings that aligned precisely with active corridor timing windows. One officer had submitted a sustained series of false traffic stop reports, detailed, time-stamped, entirely fabricated encounter records that placed him on a roadway he was not patrolling. The false documentation created cover for his actual position. He had been filing those reports for at least 18 months. They were in official department records. The network was not a loose collection of individual officers making isolated bad decisions. It had internal discipline. It had a communications protocol. It had someone actively managing the timing interface between the law enforcement escort layer and the cartel side driver teams. That coordinator turned out to be one of the 2 bail bondsmen named in the federal indictment. He operated a legitimate bonding business 2 blocks from the Webb County Courthouse. Glass front window, elastic waiting room chairs, a framed Texas DPS certification on the painted cinder block wall behind the counter. He processed bonds for misdemeanor defendants every week, DWI cases, minor possession charges, low-level warrants. His business was real. His clients were real. His secondary operational function, according to federal prosecutors, was coordinating precise timing windows between the escort officers and the CJNG cell's driver contacts on the Texas side. He used an encrypted messaging application. He rotated his operational contact number every 3 weeks. He was, investigators concluded, the primary structural reason the network had successfully avoided detection for as long as it had. And he had been running that function from a storefront on a public street in one of the most law enforcement-saturated border cities in the state. There are families in that border corridor who walked past his office window on their way to the courthouse. Parents who paid him to bond out a son or daughter after a minor charge. People who sat in those plastic chairs with paperwork in their hands, with no way of knowing that the man behind the desk was simultaneously coordinating what he believed was mass quantity fentanyl movement through the same roads their families drove every single day. Over the following 8 months, the FBI's South Texas Public Corruption Task Force built a parallel operation from the outside in. An undercover agent positioned himself as a mid-level supply coordinator for a fictional CJNG network cell. He offered payments. He proposed test corridor routes. He made introductions and allowed relationships to develop at whatever pace the subjects set. He documented everything. Every cash exchange was photographed before transfer and tracked by serial number after. Every call an officer made to confirm a corridor was clear was recorded in full. The GPS data that would anchor the final indictment came from the undercover agent's own vehicle, a federal asset physically present at each staged corridor event from the first test run through the last. The surveillance architecture the task force built was specifically designed to be invisible inside the corridor. No physical surveillance units were ever positioned along the active route. The risk of recognition in a region where law enforcement officers routinely know each other's personal vehicles was too high. Instead, the case was built entirely on electronic documentation and the controlled operational record the undercover agent generated in real time. Every piece of evidence was multi-sourced. GPS logs cross-referenced against time-stamped radio transmissions. Cash serial numbers tracked against deposit records. False patrol reports compared against cell tower data, placing the reporting officer nowhere near the location he described. By the time the task force was ready to move, they had 47 hours of recorded operational evidence, financial disbursement records showing nearly $260,000 moved across the network over 22 months, and GPS placement data for every staged corridor event. Not 1 gram of narcotics had ever actually moved. The fentanyl was pharmacologically inert powder. The methamphetamine was a staged prop with no active compound. The CJNG coordinator was a federal agent. Every escort run these officers believed they had successfully completed was a documented sting event recorded in real time, and not one of them had ever suspected it. If you have ever placed your trust in a badge and then watched this kind of story surface, drop a comment below. Because what this case reveals is the exact calculation that corrupts that trust from the inside. And the only way to interrupt it is to keep talking about it. The money in this network moved in 2 distinct tiers. Lower-level participants, patrol officers, the constable, 2 municipal officers from smaller departments, received cash payments ranging from $800 to $4,000 per escort event. Transactions happened at truck stop parking lots along Interstate 35, at a fast food drive-through window on a Saturday morning, once in the back corner booth of a family restaurant, where the officer settled the tab before the envelope crossed the table. For Vega and 2 other senior network figures, the structure was different. Vega received 3 wire transfers totaling just over $40,000, routed through a registered Texas limited liability company described on its state filing as a private security consulting firm. The LLC listed 1 client. That client was a Monterey-registered holding entity with documented connections to the CJNG cell's North American financial coordinator. A 14-year DPS trooper had established a business on paper that existed for one purpose: to receive cartel disbursements through Texas business registration infrastructure and present them as legitimate professional income. March 4th arrived after 8 months of a parallel operation that none of the subjects had detected. FBI agents and U.S. Marshals deployed simultaneously across 5 South Texas counties, beginning at 4:30 in the morning. Vega was arrested at his residence, a beige stucco house on a cul-de-sac in a subdivision north of Laredo, a DPS agency decal still affixed to the rear window of the pickup truck parked in his driveway. The Webb County deputy was taken at a diner on his way to his morning shift, a coffee cup still sitting on the counter in front of the stool he had just vacated. The bail bondsman was removed from his front doorway at 4:52 in the morning, before the subdivision streetlights had cycled off. 18 arrests. 18 sets of law enforcement credentials confiscated. 18 service weapons placed into numbered federal evidence bags. By 7 in the morning, the Southern District U.S. Attorney's Office had confirmed the operation publicly. A press conference followed later that afternoon in a federal building in Laredo. The room carried a specific kind of silence, the kind that falls when media professionals are watching officials describe something they do not quite have a framework for yet. The officers assigned to detect and disrupt cartel penetration of the border corridor had been providing armed protection for what they believed was cartel product moving through that corridor for nearly 2 years, in uniform, while communities in that corridor called 911 when they needed help and expected someone on the right side of the line to answer. The charges filed across the 18 separate criminal cases included conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, bribery of a public official, obstruction of a federal investigation, and, in Vega's case, a money laundering count directly tied to the consulting LLC. 17 of the 18 defendants faced federal firearms charges alongside the narcotics counts. Statutory exposure for several defendants exceeded 20 years. 2 faced potential life sentences under federal trafficking enhancement provisions. The charges landed with multiple evidentiary anchors on every count: wire transfers, GPS logs, cross-referenced patrol reports, false filing documentation, serial-numbered cash records. The case had been built specifically to withstand a defense strategy centered on attacking the undercover agent's credibility. There was no entrapment argument available. The subjects had initiated. They had escalated. They had repeated the conduct across documented events spanning nearly 2 years. Within 3 weeks of the sweep, 2 lower-ranking officers entered cooperation agreements. Their testimony identified 3 additional individuals, civilian, not law enforcement, who had been serving as financial couriers between the network and the CJNG cell's Monterey-based operations manager. Those 3 were taken into federal custody in a second operation 31 days after the original arrests. The chain reaction that a funeral director's phone call had put in motion was still running. A Webb County Sheriff's investigator, not connected to the indictment, was asked by a reporter what it was like to learn that someone he had worked alongside for years had been running escort operations for drug shipments through the neighborhoods they both patrolled. He did not respond immediately. When he did, he said, "I keep thinking about the calls I backed him up on, every single one of them." That is what institutional betrayal at this level actually costs. Not the press conference, not the indictment count. The ordinary officer who showed up to every shift and trusted the person standing next to him, and who now carries every shared memory forward with a new question attached to all of it. This case did not emerge from a vacuum. Texas border law enforcement corruption is a documented pattern with a consistent structure. Federal records show the Southern District of Texas has prosecuted more sworn officer public corruption cases than any other district in the country across the past decade. The corridor creates economic pressure that is specific, deliberate, and precisely targeted by criminal networks that have studied institutional vulnerabilities with greater discipline than most internal affairs units apply to identifying them. The asymmetry between what a cartel cell can offer an officer And what a municipal department can pay one is not incidental. It is the operational strategy. The structural problem is not unique to Texas. Federal prosecutors in Southern California, Arizona, and New Mexico have all filed public corruption indictments against border law enforcement personnel in the same window. The common thread is not geography. It is the gap between institutional compensation and cartel inducement, between oversight capacity and operational concealment, between the public's expectation of the uniform and what some of the people inside it are doing on certain nights on certain roads. Understanding that gap is not the same as accepting it. It is the precondition for closing it. 18 officers, nearly $260,000 in documented disbursements, narcotics shipments that never existed, and an investigation that began because one man in Nuevo Laredo decided he had seen enough and made a phone call to a federal agent he had met exactly once. The case remains active. Cooperation agreements are continuing to reshape the indictment structure. Additional proceedings are pending. The CJNG financial cell that coordinated the operation from the Mexican side remains under active federal investigation across 2 jurisdictions. The border is long, the corridor is wide, and somewhere in the Rio Grande Valley tonight, there is a marked patrol unit running dark on a farm road. The question that follows it is the same question that follows every case like this one. How many more? If this story raises that question for you, if you think these communities deserve more than a single news cycle, share this video. The people who lived inside this case do not have a platform to demand that conversation. This one is it. The badge is a symbol of something. When the person wearing it has become the threat, the damage does not stay inside one county or one corridor. It spreads into every interaction between any community and any officer who carries the same insignia. It makes every routine traffic stop carry a weight it never should. That damage accumulates quietly across years until it becomes the baseline assumption for entire populations who had almost no institutional trust to start with, and now have measurably less. And that is the real cost of what those 18 officers did. Not the indictment, not the sentence. The years of erosion that follow in every community where the uniform now carries a question mark it did not have before. Remember, this story is a work of fiction, created for educational and entertainment purposes. If you found this compelling, subscribe and share it. These stories need more than one news cycle, and the communities inside them deserve more than one audience. Thanks for watching.